She was with someone else for 2 years and thought I'd never find out. She lost everything when the truth hit. I always thought life falls apart with loud noises, but in my case it started with a quiet phone call from my best friend Mark, the kind of call where the silence between words feels heavier than the words themselves, and he said my name the way people do when they're afraid the truth they carry might shatter you, and I laughed. Because why wouldn't I laugh? Everything in my life looked perfect from the outside. We had the house, the kids, the jobs, the well-rehearsed holiday photos that made other families comment, "Wow, you guys really have it together," and I used to believe that too. Mark told me he had seen my wife Emma with someone, a man he didn't know. He said it carefully like he was handling glass, and I told him he must be mistaken because Emma and I had been together since we were teenagers, and we had grown up side by side and built a family that I thought was unshakable. And even though his voice shook a little, I still waved it off, because sometimes denial is warmer than the truth. And I didn't want to leave the warmth, not yet. But something in the tone of his voice stayed with me longer than the conversation itself. And that night, when Emma asked why I was so quiet, I told her I was just tired, and she smiled, that soft, familiar smile, a smile I had trusted for more than 2 decades. And that smile suddenly felt unfamiliar, like someone rearranged the details of a painting I knew by heart. The days that followed turned into my private detective thriller where I didn't ask questions out loud, but I watched and I listened, and I noticed things that never bothered me before: the late text messages, the sudden meetings, the perfume she never used to wear, the way she guarded her phone like it contained state secrets, and one by one the pieces clicked together in a way I didn't want them to. When the truth finally arrived, it didn't knock, it just barged in with receipts and timelines and messages that erased every last doubt. And I remember sitting at my desk in her father's company, staring at the evidence, thinking, so this is what betrayal looks like, not dramatic, not explosive, just cold and organized, like it had been living in the walls of my life for 2 years without me noticing. I didn't confront her, not right away, maybe because I knew once the words were spoken nothing would ever return to what it was, and maybe because I wanted to choose my battlefield carefully, and maybe because the shock had sculpted me into someone oddly calm, someone who could look betrayal in the eyes without flinching. Instead, I drove to her parents' house and sat in their living room and told them everything, and for a moment I expected them to defend her, or to blame me, or to say marriages are complicated, but none of that happened. Her father, the man who built the company I now helped run, looked more devastated than I felt, and her mother cried softly into her hands, and every reaction in that room told me one thing clearly: I wasn't crazy, and I wasn't alone in this. And that was the moment something inside me shifted just enough for a plan to start forming, a quiet, steady plan, not for revenge, but for justice, for clarity, for reclaiming the life I nearly lost without realizing it. I didn't change my routine right away, because sometimes the most strategic move is to act like nothing has changed, even when everything has. And I woke up next to Emma the next morning feeling like I was sharing a bed with a stranger who had borrowed my wife's face. And the funny part is she didn't even notice my silence, which probably said more than any confrontation ever could. At breakfast, the kids were joking about something online, and Emma was talking about a charity dinner, and I was sitting there thinking, 2 years, 2 entire years of my life spent loving someone who was living a different story behind my back, and yet there she was buttering toast like the world was perfectly normal. And I realized then that the calm I felt wasn't numbness, it was clarity, the kind of clarity that arrives after a storm has already done its damage. I went to work, and everyone greeted me the same, but I could feel a different energy around me, not because they knew anything, but because I knew, and knowledge changes the way you stand, the way you breathe, the way you look at doors, wondering which ones you'll close forever and which ones you'll walk through alone. Her father called me into his office quietly and closed the door, and there was something painfully human about the way he apologized for his daughter's choices, as if betrayal was a genetic defect he should have warned me about. And I told him he didn't owe me an apology because the actions were hers, not his. And he nodded slowly, like he respected me more in that moment than ever before. We talked about the future of the company, and he told me without hesitation that my position was secure and that nothing his daughter did would change my role or my worth. And that reassurance felt like someone fastening a seatbelt before a sharp turn, and I knew I would need it. When I got home that evening, Emma greeted me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes and asked if everything was all right. And I said yes in the same tone people use when they hide storms behind fences. And she looked at me for a second too long, like she sensed something had shifted, but couldn't identify it. And I almost felt sorry for her, almost. I kept my distance emotionally, not out of spite, but out of necessity, because sometimes stepping back shows you the whole picture, and the picture I saw was a marriage that had cracked quietly over time, until the pieces didn't fit anymore no matter how you turned them. Our children noticed faster than she did, which was ironic since she had been hiding a double life for years, but she couldn't spot the change in the man she had lived with since she was 17, and one night my daughter asked if I was mad at Mom. And I told her I wasn't mad, just disappointed, and older, a lot older, and she nodded like she understood more than a 16-year-old should. I didn't tell them the truth, not yet, because kids deserve one stable parent while the ground shifts beneath their feet, and for now that parent had to be me, and strangely, I didn't mind carrying the weight. Meanwhile, Emma started to sense something small, but growing like a draft under a locked door, and she began to hover around me with questions and soft touches and promises of weekend plans, and I responded politely, but without warmth, and she felt that difference like frost on a window, and she didn't know yet that this was only the beginning. The strange part about knowing a truth you haven't revealed is how it changes the temperature of every room you walk into. And in my case, the house felt colder, even when the heater was running, and Emma felt warmer, even when she wasn't trying, and those two temperatures never met in the middle anymore. I kept moving through the days like an actor who already knows how the final scene ends while the rest of the cast is still reading the script for the first time, and Emma kept watching me with that confused squint she used when she misplaced her keys, except this time the thing she misplaced was my trust, and it wasn't coming back. I started quietly collecting everything I would need, not out of paranoia, but out of preparation, because leaving a 20-year marriage requires more than emotion. It requires strategy and spreadsheets and conversations with lawyers who say phrases like "you're in a very strong position," and I guess betrayal comes with at least one unexpected perk. I didn't tell the kids yet, but they sensed the shift the way animals sense weather changes. My son, who is 19, started eating dinner in his room more often, and my daughter stayed near me like she could feel something was about to crack open, and I didn't push them either way, because sometimes the best thing a parent can do is simply not add more chaos. Meanwhile, Emma ramped up her new cheerful persona, like she believed she could fix a sinking ship with enthusiastic small talk. She started packing me lunches again. She began planning a getaway weekend. She even asked if I wanted to renew our vows, and I nearly choked on my coffee, because it felt like watching someone repaint a wall while ignoring the giant hole behind it. I didn't lie to her, but I also didn't give her anything real. I answered her questions with polite phrases that didn't reveal a single thought behind them, and she grew more anxious by the day, and I think that was when she finally started looking at me not as her husband, but as a mystery she couldn't solve. She tried asking if she had done something wrong, and I told her we would talk soon in a tone that made it clear soon was not the same as now, and she nodded too quickly like a student pretending to understand a lesson they absolutely did not understand. The truth is, I wanted the timing to be perfect, because once I pulled that thread, the entire fabric of our life would unravel instantly, and I needed to be ready for every loose end. Her parents called me regularly, checking and offering support, making it clear I wasn't just a son-in-law to them, but family, and that meant more than I expected, because losing a marriage is one thing, losing an entire network of people is another, and thankfully, I wasn't losing them. Emma, however, had no idea the storm was already circling. She only felt the pressure drop, and she knew something was coming, but not what or when or how. And she became jumpy around her phone and overly affectionate around me, which was painfully ironic, because the version of her I was seeing now was the version I needed 2 years ago, not the version she offered someone else. At night, I lay awake, building my plan step by step, and it was clear, concise, and calm, and when I finally closed my eyes, I knew the moment was coming soon, the moment she would learn that I knew everything, and that this time I wasn't the one in the dark. The morning everything shifted started like any other, which is exactly how major moments usually begin, quietly, without drama, without warning, and I was making coffee the same way I always did while Emma hovered near the counter pretending to look for vitamins she never actually took, and I could feel her watching me like a detective who finally realized the suspect had been one step ahead the entire time. She asked again if something was wrong, and this time her voice had that nervous quiver people get when they're afraid the answer might change their life, and I told her we needed to talk. But not now, and her hands froze halfway through reaching for a glass, and she nodded too slowly like she understood, but didn't want to accept the meaning behind my words. The thing about guilt is that it amplifies silence. If she had nothing to hide, she might have brushed off my mood as stress, but she felt the coldness like ice water running under a locked door, and she started piecing things together in her own mind, imagining what I could know, what I might have heard, and who might have told me, and I didn't need to say anything, because she was unraveling all on her own. At work, her father asked if I was ready for the next steps, and I told him yes, everything was lined up, and he nodded with a seriousness I had never seen in him before, the kind of seriousness that belongs to men who have built empires and know when a chapter needs to end cleanly and decisively. He reminded me again that my job, my future, and my standing would remain untouched, and I felt something close to gratitude, but deeper. The kids kept their distance from her without knowing the details, they just saw the tension, heard the quiet, sensed which parent was steady and which wasn't, and Emma noticed that too, which made her panic grow heavier, more visible. She asked them at dinner if everything was all right, and they answered with one-word replies, and exchanged glances with me, like we were all carrying the same hidden truth, even though only I knew the full picture. That evening, she followed me room to room like she was afraid I might vanish if she let me out of her sight. And finally, she asked directly, "Did someone tell you something about me?" And that was the first time she had been even remotely honest in weeks, and I looked at her, and for the first time she saw it, the truth sitting in my eyes, calm, collected, undeniable. She didn't ask what I knew, she just asked how long I had known, and that was how I knew the guilt wasn't new for her, only for me. And I told her long enough, and the air between us felt like a bridge breaking plank by plank until only the ropes were left. She started apologizing without actually saying what she was apologizing for, admitting nothing, denying nothing, speaking in circles like someone trying to erase footprints they already know are permanent. And I let her talk, because I wanted to hear what she would choose to say when she didn't know exactly which cards I was holding. But I didn't give her the conversation she wanted, not yet. Instead, I told her we'd finish this discussion in a few days, and she went pale, because a few days sounded less like a promise and more like a countdown. That night, she cried quietly beside me, thinking I was asleep, but tears don't reverse time, they don't undo choices, they don't rebuild trust, and they definitely don't erase 2 years of secrets. And while she cried, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, thinking about the moment I would finally pull the curtain all the way back and show her that the man she thought she could fool had been preparing his exit long before she realized the performance was over. The next few days felt like walking through a house built entirely out of ticking clocks. Every conversation, every glance, every silence reminded me that the moment of truth was getting closer, and Emma felt it too, because she followed me with the kind of nervous devotion people only show when they know they've crossed a line they can't uncross. And now they're trying to glue the pieces back together with apologies they haven't even said out loud. I kept my routine steady because calmness is its own kind of strategy, and she wasn't used to seeing me so composed. She kept asking if we were all right in that soft, hopeful voice she used to use back in high school when she wanted reassurance, and I used to give it without hesitation. But this time the reassurance was gone, replaced by a quiet resolve she didn't recognize. Her anxiety grew by the hour. She cleaned the house twice, she reorganized drawers, she cooked meals like she was auditioning for forgiveness, and I watched all of it with a strange, distant sadness, not because I still trusted her, but because I finally understood she was fighting for a version of me she had already lost. The kids stayed close to me and distant from her, which made her even more uneasy. My daughter barely looked at her, and my son answered her questions with polite but empty replies, and Emma kept pretending she didn't notice, but she noticed everything, because guilt sharpens awareness in a way love never does. On the third evening, she tried again, sitting next to me on the couch, leaving a careful inch of space, like she wasn't sure if she was allowed to be close. She asked if someone was spreading rumors about her, and I said no, because rumors require imagination and the truth didn't. She took a shaky breath and whispered, "Then why are you like this?" And I almost admired how she skipped the part where she denied wrongdoing, maybe because she finally realized denial wouldn't save her. I told her we would talk soon, and she froze like someone paused her mid-frame, and she said, "Please don't scare me." And I wanted to tell her I wasn't scaring her. She had scared herself 2 years ago, when she made the first decision that led us here, but I kept the thought to myself. Meanwhile, her parents kept checking on me more than on her, which said everything without saying anything. Her father even offered to stand by me when the moment came, not because he wanted to choose sides, but because the side he chose was integrity, and that was something I had always shown him. I finalized the documents, went through every detail with a lawyer who was both impressed and slightly intimidated by how organized I was. He reminded me that with the evidence, the support of both families, and the children's clear preference, I was positioned to walk away with almost everything, and not out of spite, but out of fairness. That night, I sat alone in my office at home, looking at the folder that held the truth and the future at the same time, and I realized something important. I wasn't afraid anymore, not of losing her, not of starting over, not of what came next, because betrayal doesn't break strong people, it clarifies them. And when I finally closed the folder, I knew tomorrow would be the day I ended the silence, the day her world finally caught up with mine. The next morning felt strangely calm, the kind of calm that settles before a major decision, not peaceful, but focused. And I walked through the house with the steady certainty of someone who had already accepted the ending and was ready to speak it out loud. And Emma watched me like a person waiting for a verdict they already fear. She kept trying to start conversations, but her sentences never made it past the first word, because she could feel I wasn't offering the usual soft landing. And after breakfast, I told her we needed to talk privately, and she went pale, like she had been bracing for this moment for days, and finally realized the wait was over. We sat in the living room, and she chose the far end of the couch as if distance could protect her from the truth, and I placed the folder on the table gently, not angrily, because rage wasn't part of this story. Clarity was. She looked at the folder the way someone looks at a ticking timer, knowing exactly what it contains even before opening it. I told her I knew everything, and the silence that followed wasn't surprised. It was the silence of someone who had been hoping, begging, praying that somehow I would never find out, and now had to face what she built behind my back for 2 years. And she didn't ask what I knew, she just whispered, "How long have you known?" And I answered, "Long enough," and her face collapsed into a kind of sadness that arrives too late to matter. She tried to explain, but explaining betrayal is like trying to patch a sinking boat with excuses. Every word she spoke felt hollow even to her. She said she didn't mean to hurt me. She said she got lost. She said it was complicated, and I told her it only got complicated the day she stopped being honest and started being someone I no longer recognized. She cried in that quiet, guilty way people cry when they realize the consequences are real and unavoidable, and she apologized for everything except the exact actions themselves, and I didn't rescue her from that discomfort because it wasn't my job anymore. I told her the divorce papers were ready, and she broke completely, her hands shaking, her voice cracking. She said we could fix this, we could start over, we could try again, and I told her I wasn't interested in rebuilding something she had already demolished. She had 2 years to choose us, and she didn't, and now I was choosing myself. She begged, not dramatically but desperately, like someone clutching at a door that's already closing, and I didn't yell, I didn't insult, I didn't punish, I simply stood firm and calm, and that made it harder for her, because there's nothing louder than a quiet person who means every word they say. I told her I had spoken to her parents, and they supported me, and that broke something in her eyes. She covered her mouth like she was trying to hold in the realization that even her own family saw the truth clearly and weren't shielding her from it. She asked about the kids, and I told her they would stay with me, and she nodded slowly because deep down she knew they had already chosen their distance long before any paperwork. I ended the conversation by telling her I wished her clarity and healing, but not at the cost of my own, and that was the moment she understood this wasn't a threat or a negotiation, this was a conclusion. When I stood up, she didn't follow me. She just sat there staring at the folder like it was the final chapter of a book she never expected to reach, and when I walked out of the room, I felt something I hadn't felt in months, relief, not happiness, not victory, just lightweight relief. Because the curtain had finally fallen, and I was free to walk off the stage and start the next act of my life. The strange thing about ending a 20-year marriage is that the world outside doesn't react the way you expect. There are no dramatic lightning strikes, no symbolic thunder. The sky looks exactly the same as it did the day before, even though your entire life has shifted 3 degrees to the left, and nothing fits the same anymore. Emma kept trying. She hovered around the edges of my day like a shadow that didn't know where it belonged anymore. She apologized every few hours. She left notes. She made dinners. She offered long talks. She even suggested therapy, but all of it felt like someone trying to fix a sinking ship after the water had already reached the ceiling, and I stayed polite, but unmoved, because kindness doesn't require surrender. The kids aligned themselves without hesitation. My son asked me how soon things would change. My daughter asked if they could stay with me no matter what, and I told them yes, and they didn't ask for details, because they didn't need the messy parts. They only needed stability, something Emma couldn't offer right now, not even to herself. When Emma tried talking to them, they kept their distance, not cruel, not angry, just guarded, and that hurt her more than anything I could have said. She realized too late that betrayal doesn't just break marriages, it breaks the parts of people that believed in you, and rebuilding those parts takes more than regret. Her parents stepped in often. Her father visited me at work. Her mother called to check if the kids needed anything, and they made it clear they loved their daughter, but they weren't excusing her choices, and I think that shocked Emma more than my calmness, because she expected at least them to defend her. But sometimes the truth is too clear to rewrite. As the divorce process moved forward, Emma became frantic, one moment pleading, the next apologizing, the next trying to pretend everything was normal, and I didn't judge her for it. Confusion is often the cost of consequences, catching up after years of delay, and she wasn't prepared for a version of me that didn't collapse under the weight of betrayal, but instead grew sharper, more focused, more sure of himself. I spent more time outside the house, taking walks, clearing my mind, thinking about life after this stage, and surprisingly, the future didn't scare me. It felt open, almost welcoming, like the first page of a new chapter that finally makes sense after rereading an old one full of plot holes. People at work noticed I was quieter but steadier, and they assumed something big was happening at home, but nobody asked directly, because I wasn't giving off the energy of a man falling apart. I was giving off the energy of a man reconstructing himself brick by brick. Meanwhile, Emma tried to negotiate emotionally instead of practically. She asked if we could slow down, think, talk, revisit memories, and I told her memories are not a foundation, they're decorations, and decorations don't hold a house together when the structure is already cracked beyond repair. The truth is, I didn't hate her. Hating someone takes energy I didn't want to waste. I felt more like someone finally stepping out of fog into clean air and recognizing that survival wasn't the goal, clarity wasn't. Clarity had already arrived. By the end of the week, Emma realized Something terrifying. She wasn't fighting to save the marriage anymore. She was fighting to save a version of herself she had already destroyed. And I wasn't fighting at all because I had already walked out of the emotional room long before I walked out of the marriage. The house felt different now, not louder, not quieter, just honest for the first time in a long time. The air wasn't pretending to be warm, the conversations weren't pretending to be whole, and Emma wasn't pretending to be the woman she used to be. She was just a person standing in the ruins of her own choices, trying to rebuild a door that no longer led anywhere. She woke up earlier than usual, made breakfast for everyone, and set the table like she was hosting a peace summit, except the kids walked in, grabbed what they needed, and drifted toward me without hesitation, and she watched them with a heartbroken smile. The kind people, where, when they are finally realizing the cost of their actions is far greater than the moment they made them. I didn't gloat, I didn't rub it in, I wasn't interested in emotional victories, because the real victory was clarity, the real victory was peace, the real victory was choosing myself. Emma finally asked to speak alone again, and I agreed because avoiding conversations never benefits anyone, and we sat outside on the patio where we used to drink coffee on weekends back when our lives still felt synchronized, and she looked at me not with defiance, not with excuses, but with a kind of exhausted honesty. She said she knew she had lost me completely, and I could hear the acceptance in her voice. It sounded heavy but real. And she said she wished she could go back 2 years and choose differently, but life doesn't offer rewinds, only consequences, and she had accumulated 2 years' worth. She told me she wasn't asking for forgiveness because she didn't deserve it, yet she just wanted me to know she understood what she had destroyed, and she wanted to be a better mother moving forward, and I nodded because that was the first clear sentence she had spoken in days. I told her I didn't hate her, I didn't wish her harm, I didn't want revenge, but I didn't want a marriage built on broken foundation and missing honesty. And she accepted that without a fight, which surprised both of us. Maybe she finally saw that the man she betrayed wasn't the man standing in front of her now. The man now was stronger, more grounded, more himself. Throughout the week, news of our separation leaked quietly among friends and extended family, and the reactions were exactly what you would expect: surprise, sympathy, confusion, but not for me, for her. Because nobody had ever imagined Emma would be the one to break a 20-year bond. People had always seen us as the stable couple, the predictable pair, the long-haul success story. Some friends reached out to me offering support and advice and dinners, and I appreciated it. But what I appreciated more was realizing I didn't feel the need to fall apart or cling to anyone. My emotional footing was steady, like I had already done my collapsing my hands, because this wasn't lost, this was transition, a necessary doorway into a calmer chapter. And Emma signed, too, pausing at times like she was saying goodbye to an old version of herself. When it was finished, she looked at me with a tired sadness, the kind that comes from understanding too late. And she said she hoped one day I would look back without bitterness, and I told her truthfully there was no bitterness, because bitterness is heavy, and I had spent months learning how to put things down, not carry more. We walked out separately, and the sunlight felt different on my skin, not brighter, not warmer, but unrestricted, like I was standing somewhere new, even though it was the same parking lot I had walked through 100 times before. The kids met me for dinner that night, and they were lighter too, like they had been holding their breath through the entire process, and could finally exhale. My son joked that I looked younger without stress, and my daughter hugged me for a long time and said she was proud of me, not for leaving, but for staying strong for them. And that was the moment I realized I had already won every important battle long before any paperwork was stamped. Emma reached out occasionally in the following weeks, not to manipulate or deny, but to rebuild her relationship with the kids, slowly, carefully, respectfully, and I didn't stand in the way, because growth is something every person deserves, even if I'm no longer part of their journey. But I also kept my boundaries clear. Not cruel, just firm, because peace requires fences, not walls, and not open gates. Work became a place of clarity. Her father treated me with more respect than ever, trusting me with responsibilities he once kept close to his chest, and I rose to the occasion, not out of spite, not out of ambition, but out of gratitude for a chance to build something steady in a world that had shifted so violently not long ago. People kept asking if I was lonely, and I would smile and say no, not really, because loneliness isn't about being alone, it is about being with the wrong person and feeling unseen. And for the first time in years, I felt completely visible to myself. I started taking small steps into a new version of life, reading more, walking more, making plans that didn't require compromise or permission, and every day felt like adding a brick to a foundation that was stronger because it was mine. One evening, I stood on the patio, the same place where Emma had apologized weeks before, and I realized something important. I wasn't defined by betrayal, I was defined by how I walked through it, and out the other side with my dignity intact, my humor still alive, and my head held high. The marriage was over, but the story wasn't. The story was just finally mine again. And that was the real victory, not what I kept, not what I gained, but what I reclaimed.